Hello and welcome to this new video. Today we will be taking a look on how to create super large scale 3D renders. Basically stuff for prints, posters, just things that need to be rendered at a super high resolution. Recently I've had a project like this which demanded a pretty high resolution. As you can see here, this is a pretty massive wall. I think it's like 40 meters or 50 meters long. And I think the final resolution was around 200K by 30K pixels. This is a super extreme case. I'm not sure if there is a wall in the country that's bigger than this that gets printed on like this. But if you do find yourself in a similar or maybe even worse situation, here is how to kind of do this. So let's jump into Blender, obviously. And I have a test scene here. For testing purposes, I'm not going to render at 1 trillion pixels, but I'm just going to do a simple 8x8K rendering. And obviously at some point when rendering stuff, you will run out of VRAM if the resolution is too big. I think to be able to render 100 by 100K pixels, I think that's probably not even possible. I'm not sure if a computer exists that could handle that resolution. So to fix this, we basically split up our camera into many cameras and render each tile and then stitch the tiles together. So we will be using an add-on called Super Resolution Render, or it's basically part of the Pidgeon toolbag, which is an add-on. I think you can get Super Resolution Render standalone. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think you can get a free version of Pidgeon toolbag, or maybe just Super Resolution Render. I'm not sure if you have to pay. You might have to pay, but honestly, if you are rendering such large resolutions, you are probably going to get paid. And this add-on costs like, I think 20 euros. So just buy it. It's going to save you a ton of time. So make sure you have the camera, make sure your scene is basically done. And we can basically just press this split active camera button and it splits the main camera into an 8x8 tile. So I think this add-on gives you the ability to merge the frames that you rendered inside of Blender. I couldn't use this feature, unfortunately, because my resolution was so large that any type of stitching tool would just crash, because you can't stitch 200K by 30K pixels into one image. You can't have an image that large, I think. I think there's a limit to how big an image can be. And it also just doesn't make sense for delivery, because there's still, post-production maybe that wants to do some touch-ups, and nobody can work with one image that's that size. And I also don't think there's a tool like Photoshop just crashed instantly with anything that's a bit too large. So I had to use Affinity Designer, which is great. It worked amazingly. But for my use case, this just didn't work. Maybe it does for your use case. Maybe if you have a print that's not super large, maybe if it's like 30K by 30K pixels, you could probably easily stitch this together using this tool. But if you can't, just move on with the tutorial. So now we have these split cameras, and we are gonna delete the original camera and jump into the first camera here. So you know how it is with projects. You have an add-on like this, and it probably gives me the option to render all these frames. I'm not sure how, I didn't look into it. So I basically just have a super simple script that looks at all the cameras in the scene and basically maps them out in a timeline like this. So you can just press render animation and it basically renders all images. I kind of like this approach too, because it gives you a bit more control, and theoretically you can still make some small adjustments in like a single tile and just re-render that single tile. I'm not sure if this add-on gives you the option to do this, because I think you only have a start render button or something like this. I'll leave the script in the description. So now we have all these 64 images rendered. And now we are going to use pip pillow to stitch them together. So basically, just open your command line as an admin and first of all, head to the drive of the render output, and then head into the output folder, typing in cd and then pasting in your path. Now we are inside the folder. And in the description, you will find another Python script that basically does all the stitching. But before we run this script, what we also need to do is basically pip install pillow. So this basically installs pillow. We need this for stitching. And just copy paste this script and save it as a Python file. Save it probably outside this folder, I'd say. You can kind of save it wherever you want, to be honest. And we head into that folder. And the important part is here, you need to put in the path to all the renders you made. And you also need to type in the correct amount of columns and rows. Otherwise, the script won't work. It's also important that your renders are named accordingly. So basically 0001 to 64. Once that is all done, all we have to do is go into the folder where the Python script is saved, and then type in Python and the file name of the stitching script. Then press enter. As you can see, it's generating the image now. And here it is, the final stitched image, which has a resolution of 8 by 8K. And keep in mind, the bigger the files, or like the bigger the resolution, the more RAM it will need to stitch this together. So if you are having troubles and your computer is crashing, the script is sort of like stopping because it's out of RAM, it's crashing or whatever. I recommend you to split, to like keep the stitching to just strips, would be my first suggestion. Then maybe you try to do like rows of 2, like you stitch these together and then these. So you kind of break it up into larger chunks and not just like one final merge. But then you still need a tool where you can put these together. Like if you're doing a delivery and somebody wants, whatever file, you could try to use Photoshop, because most people use Photoshop, even if it's not really made for this kind of work. I wouldn't recommend Photoshop. It's really terrible with really big resolutions. Well, it doesn't work, to be honest, with big resolutions. I was not able to get a 200 by 30K resolution in Photoshop. So I used Affinity Designer, which works extremely well. You have to be a bit patient. You have to, let it load, but you can kind of trust the tool, because I was able to deliver the files, and it was 2 files, and they had a resolution of like 150K by 30K, something like this. And it worked. And I even had like layers in it. So I had the beauty paths and I had some ID masks. So in post-production, people could still do some file editing. So another problem was the bit depth. You can't just, save it as JPEG or PNG. So another problem was the file format. You definitely can't use EXR, and it's not really made for this, I feel like. I just recommend to use TIFF whenever you can, because EXR is such a specialized format. Maybe if you are using Nuke or stuff like that, I think Nuke probably has the ability to do stitching like this. But if you don't have Nuke, I just try to stay as small in size and as simple as possible. So if you need like multiple layers like masks, I just render it all as separate TIFF layers, because that's just the best way to go about it. If you like render everything as an EXR, I don't even want to know how big these EXRs would be together if you were to render 200 by 30K. I think with all the tips I had, we were maybe like at a few terabytes, I think maybe like 1 or 2 terabytes, I'm not sure, but it was pretty big. So just try to be smart about it and don't try to like force a workflow that doesn't even make sense. If you can use TIFF and it's fine, like you don't have to use EXR for all types of CG renders. Honestly, I personally don't like EXR, not because the format is bad, the format is amazing, but most of the tools just haven't caught up to the workflow yet, because if you use a lot of After Effects like me, you're just kind of cursed, because After Effects cannot work properly with EXR. It doesn't buffer well, it can't play back. After Effects can't even play back simple shapes. Why would EXR work? Like if you're using Nuke, I'm sure EXR is a blast, but most people don't have Nuke that work like as freelance at home because it's super expensive. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to share. If there's any more specific questions, you can always ask me in the comments and I will do my best to answer. And I'll see you in the next video.